This presentation is going to be somewhat different than the previous ones. It's not as technical, but rather hopefully informative. Um, I'm Maciej Woroniecki, and I'm a partner at Stufish, and we're a group of architects, designers, engineers, and overall creatives. And we look to kind of challenge the entertainment industry and propose new and innovative solutions to better engage the audience. That's kind of engaging the audience is the whole key of what we do. So here's a little show reel of ours. So that's mainly some of the more recent work that we've done. Now, the founder of the studio, this amazing man, Mark Fisher, the late and great, he started as an architect, and he practiced as an architect for a little bit, but found out that it wasn't really for him. And by chance, he started working with Pink Floyd and developing and building their inflatables. And that's how kind of our studio started, just by happenstance, by wanting to start something new. And when Mark started, the industry looked more like something on the left, and that's Beatles playing Shea Stadium in 1966. Ringo Starr's quote kind of says it all, that the thing he remembers the most from that is how far they were away from the audience. And then in 2009, when we did the claw for U2, everything had changed. But it took a lot to get from one side to the other. A lot of work, a lot of testing, a lot of technology needed to advance and be challenged, new ideas being proposed. This is a bit slow here. So this is a body of our work since The Wall. This is about 150 projects. This isn't all of them, but these are the key ones. And it took all of that to kind of get where we are right now in stage design, but also architecture. Our company doesn't only do sets, we also do permanent buildings, venues, any kind of space that engages any kind of audience, anybody that looks and interacts with our work. This is our key demographic. And I'm going to kind of cover two aspects of our work. One is on the show side, and one is on the venue. It'll be very focused with few examples, showing that there's a linear path of progression, that we always kind of challenge the notion of what is standard in the industry and try to propel it forward into new ways. And so milestones for our company are very important. And the drawing you see there is by Mark. That's Bridges to Babylon, which was this fantastic bridge that came out over the audience from A stage to B stage. It was designed by Atelier 1, broke on the first night. But the key milestones that I'll be covering that kind of define our office and define how we are approaching our work are Animals in 1977 from Pink Floyd, and The Wall in 1980, Steel Wheels in 1989, and then a seminal moment in our practice's history, Pop Mart for U2 in 1997. In 2004, Ka, which was now a new typology, architecturally speaking, for our practice, because we're in a venue and we're designing the auditorium, the stage. We're expanding, we're diversifying in a way. U2 360 in 2009, and then I'll kind of touch on a few things and how we're moving ahead in our practice and in what we do. So in 1977, Animals, that dashing fellow there is Mark with his inflatable, designed these inflatables to float above the band. Now, why is it a milestone? This is the first time that a band actually hired a design team, engineers, designers, and artists to stage an event with scenic elements. And it was fantastic. Mark designed and built these pigs, and these pigs at the end of the concert would fly up go behind stage, and with an igniter and propane, they'd explode to great fanfare. Mark and an amazing man, Richard Hartman, then, and the last concert that this happened, filled it with a bit of too much hydrogen, and the tether snapped that held them back, and it fell down molten and broke a lot of cars, so Roger Waters didn't want to do that anymore. What was really interesting here as well is in order to get those inflatables to float above the band, because there wasn't any scaffolding here, this wasn't that kind of stage set, Ted Happold and Fry Otto were called in, very famous engineers, to design these umbrellas that came out of the stage set and hover above the band. So there was really a lot of innovation already starting there. 1980, Pink Floyd, it's a milestone because this is the first theatrical rock and roll show. That's a sketch Mark did, a four-point perspective. You can see Teacher there, and then Teacher in real life. Also, this was Mark Fisher and Jonathan Park at that time. They engineered that, designed Teacher. But what's really amazing about this concert was how Mark designed the flipper, which would knock down the wall. So the way that the concert, I'm not sure if everybody's aware, but you know, the wall was built during the concert. It was that big statement, and then at the very end, the wall came crashing down. And in order to come down, Mark and Jonathan Park designed this flipper that would come down inside these bricks and destabilize the wall, and you'd have that great effect at the very end of the concert. Again, in 2010, we rejoined with Roger Waters for the other wall tour. 1989, Steel Wheels for the Rolling Stones. This was Mark's first big, full, holistic stage design, and this really propelled his career. He almost didn't do this because it had to be a free pitch. Mark couldn't afford it, but then he couldn't afford to let go of the Stones. So that really started him to what then became us. This is where Stufish, as we are now, this band of creative brothers and sisters, Pop Mart. And Pop Mart's an obvious milestone because it set a benchmark for the whole industry. Largest low-res LED screen ever made by Seiko, and this would start to inform a lot of what we do and a lot of what's seen around here, all of this low-res screen that gives this transparency, and that was a beautiful byproduct from the Seiko developed LEDs there. You can see the panels. There were 2 sets of 240 panels that made up, I forget the description, it was the world's largest video screen with the tallest cocktail stick impaling the biggest olive ever stuffed. That's a pretty cool description for something iconic. Now, what was really quite wonderful as a discovery in the States that was the transparency that happened in the screen when it was backlit. When there wasn't content and the screen was backlit, there was this quality to it that was just waiting to be misused somewhere else. And I'll get to where it's misused again for U2 and with Seiko later on. So 2004, Milestone, Ka, Cirque du Soleil in Vegas. How do we rethink the auditorium? How do we extend the auditorium? How do we challenge how a theater actually works? We bring it into the auditorium. We bring the scenic elements of the stage into the auditorium and make it immersive. Before there was AR or VR, this was an immersive experience. The scenes were happening around you. You were on the stage almost. And added to that, the stage was also rethought as a dynamic platform that could tilt and yaw, go vertical, and the performers were actually held inside. The stage rather, had kinetic elements that came out so that acrobats could actually jump around and do all of their bits on it. This was a completely new typology for stage design. This was the auditorium now performing as a performer, much like the living performers. 2009, U2 360, I'm sure everybody knows this. This was in collaboration with Willie Williams and Frederick Opsimer and Atelier One. It's obvious why that's a milestone. It's the highest grossing concert, the biggest set to travel the world in 110 trucks, a pantograph screen that would expand above the band. It was in the round, no back of house. It was an incredible feat of engineering. It was a wonderful idea. It democratized an event. It wasn't end on. And because Mark was part of how the stage building industry actually evolved, the intelligence in the design and how it's assembled, how it travels, and then how it disassembles and leaves was also quite a first. Nothing of this scale was traveling at that time because it was far too complex. But with clever designing, this traveled the world for years and disappeared just as quickly. 2008 isn't necessarily a milestone, but it's a turning point for our practice. Beijing Olympics, Mark was called in to consult initially, but then became very involved in certain elements, like the globe, designing the globe. This was rebuilt recently, I found out, in around Hubei. Actually that, and it's still a telescopic globe coming out the ground. This was a wild success, and it actually opened the practice up to new, ever-increasing typologies. So going from set and theater to actually then building. Post the Olympics, this is where Stufish starts to redefine where its focus is. What are we actually trying to address? And we were addressing the venues and the shows. The venues and how they performed, how they supported a show, and how a show with elements like a screen and a stage can be repurposed. How can we redefine what those standards of the industry actually are? We would extend the stage, we would expand the scene, all in the goal of actually engaging the audience in some new way, something that could continuously propel. 2010 then, we were asked to design the hand show for Franco Dragone in Wuhan, China. Now, much like Ka, we had to think, how do we redefine how a auditorium performs? How does it support a show? Externally, there's an expression of that this extension of the auditorium in the show outwardly with this bi-disc facade, 18,000 LED discs with 4-point LEDs that would run content to express it. It's very loud, but quite simple and straightforward. But internally, what was really important about this theater was the way that it revealed the performance physically for the audience. The seating revealed an act that the audience then became a performance. Much like in Ka, you were just observing, but you were within the performance. Within this theater, the swing seats in the lower tier would open up, revealing a deep pool in this auditorium, and then the upper tier seating would drop 7.5 meters to create a kind of proscenium thrust. So you go from a proscenium to a semi-in-the-round thrust with a dry and wet stage. And just to kind of clarify how exactly that works. So this was happening while the show was going on. Nobody would expect it. The ambient temperature would affect the water. Everybody would feel it. It would become a wholly physical experience when it happened. Added to that, how do you push that a little bit more? You know, referencing U2 360, we had 3 robotic arms with 7x15 LED screens that would sit on the ends, and these screens would go proud of the dry stage and over the audience when it was still a dry stage and become performers in themselves. A backdrop to performers, but also do their own bits. That's still running. On the show side, we question the screen, the LED screen. How can a screen become something physical, not just by bending or boxing, but how can it become sculptural? So for Robbie Williams' TTC tour, we scanned his head in order to make a big statement, and then got to working in building that out in large parts. Before there was parametric design, this 50 mil pitch, all of these perforations you see were done by hand, were filled with LEDs by hand and wired, and it was very laborious. But the ultimate goal was how could we create a sculptural screen, a massive statement that worked during the day and surprised at night when the gig was at its height. When it was lit during the night, it also still worked. It was still ever present. The gig went on. But then when you started to mix media and you went from just a sculptural piece and then running a variety of content, this was something new. This was the start of something trying to define how a flat surface can actually have a lot more three-dimensionality, which would go on to another project that I'll talk about just a little later. And then on the venue side, after that, we looked at the Dai show. This was a theater in Xishuangbanna, China, And our remit was quite expansive there. This was almost a holistic project for us where we designed the landscape, the facade, the structure, the auditorium, the scenic elements. And we were influenced obviously by nature because there was a very regional cultural influence that needed to be kept. That's my mom there next to a massive palm frond. That became the language for the theater. Sorry, which had this folded roof, this palm frond roof, and it's this organic quality that we chose to fill the auditorium with and then express it externally on the facade. So it wasn't that you had to go into the theater to get a sense that you were within the scene. Just approaching the building, you were approaching the scene. You were approaching the scenic elements of the show. And they propagated internally. We did the interior design as well to take on this vernacular. And then internally, that structure was expressed as a designed grid that was also folded, integrating all of the lighting and TSE elements. We had a serious height restriction here because of a flight path, so it was very compressed. But we had 10 acrobatic gates, these kind of donut gates that were in the, I guess you'd call it the tree canopy, the grid. And that allowed creatures to perform above the audience. And anyway, the whole notional language architecture came from the proscenium. These banyan roots that grew out of the stage. This was a wet-dry stage, into the roof grid, where you had that folded nature, and then outside. What was a nice discovery here was that because the climate allowed us to have the lobby exposed, it wasn't contained, it was outdoor, an open-air lobby. We started to actually think about a pre-show, an outdoor pre-show, because the sightlines were quite good from the first floor lobby, which you're seeing here. We started to see how can the nature of a theater split, that you have a performance inside that's ticketed, but you actually have a pre-show outside that's all part of the experience, extending it outside a little bit further so that you start to blend that nature. 2018, U2 Experience Innocence Tour. Now, this is in collaboration with Willie Williams and Frederick Opsimer, which I think is here somewhere. The screen and the stage. At this point, they're becoming a single thing. You can inhabit the screen, much like we were trying to do with Robbie Williams and seeing how it can become physical. This is splitting that screen in half and putting the performance on the inside. You can extend the performance by just using it as a standard screen, but you can also split that screen and make a stage at the bottom of it, so it's a thin platform where the performers can run up and down. But then you really start to use that low res where you mix the live and the digital, and Bono spits on the edge, and you're really hybridizing now that technology and letting stars walk on stars as an added bonus. Here we get kind of full circle, right? 1997, we have Pop Mart and the introduction of the low res massive LED screen, and then in 2018 with the same players, we produced the big screen that was used in that tour. Now looking ahead, just one example of what we're currently working on, and there's a lot, but just kind of in this thread. We did a research project on how we can expand the idea of holding these pre-show areas in front of theaters that could support them. In this case, we used a medium mesh connected to a roof awning that would extend out over this kind of external amphitheater, but then look at designing the lobby space to look down onto that space. So people that were ticketed and already inside had a fantastic view, like a VIP view on the space, but the public also had their kind of space to enjoy these public performances. And we used that concept on a winning project that we're currently working on the Keller Auditorium in Portland. And the whole one big move for this architecture was focusing on a very famous fountain designed by Halpern, which was originally meant to be a public performance stage. This was a fountain, but it was always meant to be a performance area. And the auditorium kind of almost in a way faced its back to this fountain. We decided to include new program, restaurant and bar, curve the facade so it was orientating itself down to this stage at the bottom, and start to generate the life. So this was a dual aspect lobby, effectively. One looking at public performances and the other allowing access into the auditorium for those ticketed performances. But going forward, I guess the real key points to end on, the ethos of how we move forward, learning from what we've done in the past, are kind of three approaches that we have to how we develop, how we design our work. One, we don't have a house style, but a house ambition. And we believe that real good, unique design is born from curiosity. It's every project that we do, the typologies are just all over the place. Every project is unique, every requirement is unique, and every context is unique. So we can't approach it with one ready-to-go cookie-cutter style. Everything is brand new. Secondly, we have to challenge the standards. The things that have been used before, we have to reuse them and misuse them, because we believe that uniqueness is born of misuse. When you get a thing, you have to break that thing apart and see what else it can do. How can you misuse technology that's already working fantastically? It hasn't all been figured out. You know, all of these simple things can do much, much more. And we have to always be conscious who we're designing for. The people that are right under the stage at Beyonce's concert, or above the stage in Bigger Bang for Rolling Stones, or walking past our buildings outside, just general pedestrians, or ticketed internally and watching a show that we had hand in. We designed for an audience. Thank you. There aren't any questions, I assume? Good? Yes? No? Oh, no. Yeah.
Right, can you hear me okay? I'm
Yep.
just wondering that, you know, live, I'm probably too
No,
loud.
it's good. It's good.
Live performances are becoming more and more popular, and it's growing as an industry, probably more so than it's ever been. Are those who see live performance going to start to want to see the experience and fantastic effects and adventurous, you know, environments you create at live events in other environments, in, you know, where
AV and AR and all that?
Yeah, you know, they're going to start to want to create ideas for themselves in other environments, from what they see as avid concert goers. So they want to replicate that in other areas.
But do you mean that more like in augmented spaces where you're kind of taking away the reality of being mashed up with 30,000 people?
Well,
or?
in terms of concepts, you know, rethinking spaces based on
absolutely.
the creativity that you show in the way you differentiate between these events.
Look, there are. We have to be able to look back at what we've designed and see where it was a failure. Not necessarily a failure, but could have been better. And venues that are fixed for a single type of show are just not viable anymore. Flexibility in an auditorium, the basic idea of a black box theater, right? Where you can completely reconfigure the auditorium and the lighting and the grid to support a variety of shows is really, really important. But when you're talking about 7,000 seats, it becomes really, really difficult, right? We just designed actually a 7,600 seat theater in Zhuhai, outside of Guangdong in Guangzhou in China. And you know, we're thinking about flexibility. 7,600 seats. It's just like, how can you make it flexible? How can you repurpose this for a completely different show? We haven't figured that out. But for 2,000 seat venues, we're actively working on proposing completely new structures for performative venues.
I mean,
that's kind of architecturally, that's our greatest ambition.
I mean, you're doing some amazing things based on a fresh challenge every time, that you're probably using ideas from what you used beforehand. But if I'm looking at creating, we're moving into that area of AV now, where we're trying to think of things differently, and we're yearning for fresh ideas from different environments we can use and think of practically to create new things ourselves. And these sort of things, technology is fine, but we're lacking on the creative and design side. I think we're moving back to that because people are getting a bit fed up of technology for its own sake, and they want to reintroduce this creativity and artistic vision that we've been lacking. But those skills are somehow slightly short. But you know, watching what you're doing could well inspire them to behave a bit more bravely and try new things.
There's a project that we're currently working on where conceptually it's completely figured out, but none of the supporting technology exists, right? So it's bespoke throughout, and we're gonna have to R&D it for, I don't know, half a year probably. But you know, that's why those are the kind of projects, you know, you live for, because as long as somebody can fund it, you know, you're gonna introduce something new into the industry. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Very, very insightful. I actually worked on a couple of the shows that you guys designed, so thanks for that. That was a long couple of
Right.
weeks. Just, I don't know if you have any thoughts on smaller types of auditorium or kind of multi-purpose spaces. You know, 200, 300 down to 60, 80. Have you guys kind of worked on that sort of stuff? And maybe
We have done, yeah.
What's your thoughts on audience engagements in the kind of smaller context to, you know, big auditoria?
Yeah, I mean, it's a scalability issue because of you're either in a more controlled acoustically space, or it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. Whether or not it's a fully manipulatable space, or it's purpose built for a specific kind of event. We have worked on smaller venues that were around 200, scaling down to about 50, but they were quite limited in scope. The majority of our venues are, again, like around 1,200 to 7,000 seats, which is great. But again, the smaller venues allow you to kind of integrate a lot more into them because there's a lot less stuff that you have to get into them. Seating, you know, there's so much advancement in seating technology, retractable seats, and you know, I'm missing the name now. Gala seating, you know, Gala's been around for a long time, and they're on the cusp, I'm sure, of a completely new kind of seat that can retract and disappear without requiring 6 meters of basement to hide all of it, because, you know, that's always the problem. But yeah, that's all I can really say about that. Okay, thank you very much.